The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the front steps of St. Mary's Orphanage. Tommy sat there alone, his small legs dangling over the edge, watching the world go by. He was 7 years old, but his eyes looked much older, like he'd seen too much for someone so young. Inside the building, he could hear the excited voices of other kids. Another family had come today. Another Saturday filled with hope for everyone except him. Tommy had learned not to get his hopes up anymore. He'd watched 23 families come and go in the past year. He counted each one. None of them picked him. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he was too quiet. Maybe he didn't smile enough. The house mother always told him to smile more when visitors came. But Tommy found it hard to smile when his heart felt heavy. Other kids would run up to the grown-ups, showing off their drawings or telling jokes. Tommy just stood in the corner, hoping someone would notice him anyway. They never did. The autumn wind picked up, scattering brown leaves around his feet. Tommy pulled his thin jacket tighter. It was getting cold, but he didn't want to go inside yet. Inside meant rules and schedules and the constant noise of 15 other children. Out here, at least he could think. He thought about his mom and dad sometimes. Their faces were getting fuzzy in his memory now, like an old photograph left in the sun. 3 years had passed since the accident. 3 years since the police officer came to tell him his parents weren't coming back. 3 years of different homes, different beds, different people who said they'd take care of him but didn't stay. Tommy heard gravel crunching in the driveway. His heart didn't even skip anymore when cars pulled up. He'd learned that lesson. But this wasn't a fancy car like the ones families usually drove. It was an old pickup truck, dusty and dented with mud on the tires. A tall man climbed out. He wore worn jeans, boots that had seen better days, and a cowboy hat that shaded his face. He wasn't dressed like people who came to adopt kids. He moved slowly, like his body was tired, pulling boxes from the truck bed. Tommy watched as the man made several trips, carrying supplies to the back door where deliveries went. The man didn't look at the children playing in the yard. He didn't wave or smile. He just did his work quiet and steady. On his last trip, the cowboy paused. He set down his box and pulled out a handkerchief, wiping his forehead. That's when his eyes landed on Tommy. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The man's face was weathered, with lines around his eyes and gray showing in his beard. But his eyes weren't mean. They were sad, maybe, or tired. Tommy couldn't tell which. The cowboy nodded at him, just a small movement of his head. Tommy didn't nod back. He'd learned not to trust grown-ups too quickly. The man picked up his box and went inside. Tommy thought that was the end of it. Just another face he'd see once and never again. But 10 minutes later, the cowboy came back out. He walked straight toward Tommy, his boots making soft thuds on the walkway. Tommy tensed up, ready to run if he needed to. But the man stopped a few feet away, respectful of his space. "Mind if I sit?" the cowboy asked, his voice rough like gravel. Tommy shrugged. It was a free country, wasn't it? That's what people always said. The man sat down on the steps, leaving a comfortable gap between them. He didn't try to ruffle Tommy's hair or ask him dumb questions like, "What's a nice boy like you doing out here?" He just sat there looking out at the same view Tommy had been watching. They sat in silence for a while. Tommy snuck glances at the stranger. Up close, he could see the man's hands were rough and scarred, like he worked hard for a living. His boots were scuffed but clean. There was something solid about him, like an old tree that had weathered many storms. "I'm Jake," the man finally said, not looking at Tommy, just stating a fact. "Tommy," the boy replied quietly. "Nice to meet you." Tommy, more silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was different from the silence Tommy usually felt, the lonely kind that pressed down on his chest. This silence felt softer somehow. "You live here?" Jake asked after a while. "Yeah. You like it?" Tommy thought about lying, giving the answer grown-ups wanted to hear. But something about this man made him tell the truth. "No, but I don't got anywhere else." Jake nodded slowly, like he understood. "That's hard." "It's okay," Tommy said automatically, the words he'd been taught to say. "Is it really?" The question surprised Tommy. Grown-ups never pushed when he said things were okay. They seemed relieved, actually, like they didn't want to know the truth. But this cowboy was looking at him now, really looking, waiting for a real answer. "No," Tommy whispered. "It's not okay." Jake nodded again. "Didn't think so." I could see it in your eyes. Something twisted in Tommy's chest. Someone had actually seen him. Not just looked at him, but really seen him. I got a ranch about 30 miles from here, Jake said, going back to looking at the horizon. Just me and some cattle and a couple of horses. It's quiet out there. Sometimes too quiet. Tommy didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. I come here once a month with supplies. Food, clothes, whatever the kids need. Been doing it for about 5 years now. Why? Tommy asked. Jake was quiet for a moment. Because I remember what it's like to feel alone. Even when you're surrounded by people. Tommy's throat felt tight. He wanted to say something, but the words were stuck. Jake stood up slowly, his knees cracking. Well, I should get going. Long drive back. He started to walk away, then turned back. Hey, Tommy. It was good talking to you. Hope I see you again sometime. The cowboy walked to his truck, climbed in, and drove away, leaving dust in the air. Tommy sat on those steps long after the truck disappeared down the road. His heart felt strange, like something had shifted inside it. For the first time in months, he felt something other than emptiness. He didn't know it then, but that brief conversation on the orphanage steps would change everything. Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones who arrive with big promises and bright smiles. Sometimes they're quiet cowboys with sad eyes who know what loneliness looks like because they've worn it themselves. That night, Tommy lay in his narrow bed, listening to the sounds of other boys sleeping around him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely invisible. Someone had seen him. Someone had sat with him. Someone had listened. It was just a small moment. But small moments can plant seeds. And sometimes, if you're lucky, those seeds grow into something beautiful. Jake couldn't stop thinking about the boy. It had been 3 days since his delivery to the orphanage, and Tommy's face kept appearing in his mind at the strangest times. While feeding the horses, while mending fences, while drinking his morning coffee on the porch, those hollow eyes, that quiet resignation in such a young voice, it reminded Jake of looking in the mirror 30 years ago, back when he was a kid bouncing between relatives who didn't really want him. He tried to push the thoughts away. What could he do about it anyway? He was just a rancher barely making ends meet. His marriage had fallen apart 5 years ago, and he'd been living alone ever since, which was exactly how he liked it. No complications, no one to disappoint, no one to leave. But the boy's face wouldn't leave him alone. On Thursday evening, Jake found himself standing by his truck, keys in hand, having a conversation with himself that probably made him look crazy. "This is stupid," he muttered. "You don't know anything about kids." But his feet were already carrying him to the driver's seat. Before he could talk himself out of it, he was on the road, heading back toward St. Mary's Orphanage. The sun was setting when he pulled into the driveway. Kids were playing in the yard, their voices carrying on the cool evening air. Jake felt his stomach twist with nerves. What was he even doing here? What would he say? He spotted Tommy sitting in the same spot as last time on those front steps. The boy was alone again, drawing something in a notebook. Jake's boots felt heavy as he walked across the yard. Tommy looked up, and for a split second, Jake saw something flash across the boy's face. Surprise maybe, or hope. But it disappeared so fast, Jake might have imagined it. "Hey," Jake said, stopping a few feet away. "Hey," Tommy replied, closing his notebook quickly. "Mind if I sit again?" Tommy shrugged, scooting over to make room. Jake settled down beside him, taking off his hat and setting it on his knee. They sat in silence for a minute. Jake searched for the right words, but everything he thought of sounded dumb in his head. "You came back," Tommy finally said, his voice so quiet Jake almost missed it. "Yeah, I did." Why? It was a fair question. Jake wished he had a better answer. "Honestly? I'm not sure. Just felt like I should." Tommy looked at him with those old eyes. People don't usually come back. The weight of that statement hit Jake in the chest. How many times had this kid been left behind? How many promises had been broken? "Well, I'm here now," Jake said. "And I was thinking, maybe you'd want to get some ice cream or something. If that's okay with you, I mean. And if the folks inside say it's all right." Tommy stared at him like he'd just suggested flying to the moon. "Ice cream? Yeah, there's a place in town. Nothing fancy, but they got good flavors. My treat." Suspicion crept into Tommy's face. "Why would you do that?" Jake understood the question behind the question. Why would a stranger want to spend time with him? What did this man want? "Because I think you could use a friend," Jake said honestly. "And maybe I could too." Tommy chewed on his bottom lip, thinking it over. Jake could see the war happening inside him, hope fighting with fear. Okay, Tommy said finally, but I gotta ask Miss Helen first. Miss Helen, the orphanage director, was a stout woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She interviewed Jake for 20 minutes in her office, asking him questions that made him sweat. Why was he interested in Tommy? What were his intentions? Did he understand the responsibility of spending time with a vulnerable child? Jake answered everything honestly. He didn't have a grand plan. He just couldn't stop thinking about the kid. Miss Helen studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but you bring him back by 8 o'clock. And Mr. Jake? Don't make promises you can't keep. This boy has had enough disappointment. Yes, ma'am, Jake said. The ice cream shop was a small place on Main Street with checkered floors and red vinyl booths. Tommy pressed his nose against the glass case, looking at all the flavors like he was studying for a test. You can get whatever you want, Jake said. 2 scoops if you like. Tommy looked up at him, checking if he meant it. When Jake nodded, the boy smiled. It was just a small smile, but it transformed his whole face. Chocolate chip and cookie dough, Tommy decided. Jake ordered vanilla for himself, and they slid into a booth by the window. Tommy attacked his ice cream like he was afraid it might disappear. Jake ate slowly, watching the boy. So, Jake said, what do you like to do? You got any hobbies? Tommy shrugged. I like drawing. And reading sometimes. And I used to like building things with blocks, but I'm too old for that now. You're never too old for building things, Jake said. I build stuff all the time on my ranch. Fixed a whole chicken coop last month. You got chickens? About 20 of them. They're mean little things, but they give good eggs. Tommy's eyes lit up with curiosity. What else you got? Jake found himself talking about his ranch, describing the horses and cattle, the big barn that needed painting, the creek that ran through the property. Tommy listened like Jake was telling the most interesting story in the world. It sounds nice, Tommy said quietly when Jake finished. It is. Lot of work, though. Gets lonely sometimes. Yeah, Tommy said, understanding in his voice. I know about lonely. They finished their ice cream in comfortable silence. On the drive back to the orphanage, Tommy stared out the window at the passing streetlights. Mr. Jake, he said as they pulled into the driveway. Just Jake is fine. Jake, are you going to come back again? The question was casual, but Jake heard the fear underneath it. The fear of hoping for something that wouldn't happen. Jake looked at the boy, at those eyes that had seen too much disappointment. He knew he was about to make a promise, and he knew how important it was to keep it. Yeah, Tommy, I'll come back. How about next Saturday? We could go to the park or something. Really? Really, I promise. Tommy nodded, but Jake could see he didn't quite believe it yet. That was okay. Trust had to be earned, especially when it had been broken so many times before. As Tommy walked back into the orphanage, he turned and waved. Jake waved back, then sat in his truck for a moment, wondering what he'd just gotten himself into. He'd made a promise to a boy who'd learned not to trust promises. Now he had to prove that some grown-ups actually kept their word. It scared him, this sudden responsibility. But it also felt right in a way he couldn't explain. Jake drove home through the dark countryside, his mind full of thoughts. When he got back to his empty ranch house, it felt emptier than usual. He looked around at the spare bedroom he used for storage, at the quiet kitchen, at the life he'd built around being alone. Maybe, just maybe, it was time for that to change. That night, Jake lay awake staring at the ceiling. He thought about Tommy sitting alone on those steps, convinced no one cared. He thought about his own childhood, about what it meant to be unwanted. He thought about second chances and how rare they were. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. Saturday came and Jake was there right on time. Then the next Saturday, and the one after that. For 6 weeks straight, Jake showed up at St. Mary's Orphanage every weekend without fail. At first, Tommy waited for him to disappoint. The boy would watch the clock, expecting Jake to be late or not show up at all. But Jake was always there, sometimes even early, leaning against his truck with that worn cowboy hat pulled low. They did simple things. Went to the park and threw a football around. Visited the library where Tommy could pick out any book he wanted. Grabbed burgers at the diner on Oak Street. Jake wasn't fancy or trying too hard. He was just there, steady and reliable like the sunrise. Tommy started to relax little by little. His shoulders didn't stay so tense. He talked more, shared small pieces of his story. He told Jake about his parents, how his dad used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings shaped like Mickey Mouse. How his mom sang off key but didn't care who heard. How the accident happened on a rainy Tuesday and how Tommy had been at school, not knowing his whole world was ending. Jake listened. He didn't try to fix anything or say it would all be okay. He just listened, and somehow that was exactly what Tommy needed. One Saturday afternoon in November, they were sitting on a bench feeding ducks at the pond. Tommy threw breadcrumbs and watched the ducks fight over them. "Why don't you got any kids?" Tommy asked suddenly. Jake was quiet for a moment. "My ex-wife and we tried for a long time. It just never happened for us. Then other things fell apart and she left. That was 5 years ago. Do you miss her?" "Sometimes I miss the idea of not being alone. But honestly, we weren't right for each other. Sometimes people just aren't meant to be together." Tommy nodded like he understood something deep about that. "I had 3 foster homes before I came back to St. Mary's. They all said they wanted me. But then they changed their minds. That wasn't about you. Tommy, sometimes grown-ups don't know what they're getting into. They mean well, but they're not ready. That's what Miss Helen says. But it still feels like something's wrong with me." Jake turned to face the boy. "There's nothing wrong with you. You hear me? You're a good kid who got dealt a bad hand. That's not your fault." Tommy's eyes got shiny, but he blinked fast, pushing the tears back. "I've been in the orphanage for 2 years now. Nobody wants a kid like me. I'm too old, too quiet. Families want babies or little kids who smile all the time." The pain in those words made Jake's chest hurt. He wanted to argue, to tell Tommy he was wrong, but he knew the boy was just speaking his truth. The world could be cruel to kids who needed homes. "You ever think about what you'd want?" Jake asked. "If you could have any kind of home, what would it be like?" Tommy thought for a long time. "Quiet, I think. Not in a lonely way, but peaceful. Maybe with some animals. And someone who doesn't yell. Someone who keeps their promises." He looked at Jake. "Someone like you." The words hung in the air between them. Jake felt something shift in his chest, like a door he'd kept locked was slowly opening. That evening, after dropping Tommy back at the orphanage, Jake sat in Miss Helen's office. She offered him coffee, which he accepted even though his hands were already shaking from nerves. "You've been coming around a lot," Miss Helen said, not unkindly. "Tommy looks forward to your visits. He talks about you during the week. He's a good kid." "He is. He's also a hurting kid, and hurting kids need stability, not temporary friendships." Jake knew what she was getting at. "What would I need to do?" "To foster him, I mean." Miss Helen's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't look surprised. "You'd need to go through the process. Background checks, home inspection, parenting classes. It takes a few months usually. And Mr. Jake, I have to ask, are you sure about this? Taking in a child, especially one with Tommy's history, it's not easy. He's going to test you. He's going to push you away before you can leave him. Are you ready for that?" Jake thought about his quiet ranch, his simple life, his careful solitude. He thought about Tommy's eyes when he asked if Jake would come back. He thought about all the Saturdays ahead and how empty they'd feel if he stopped coming. "I'm not sure I'm ready," Jake admitted. "But I know I can't just walk away from him. That kid deserves someone who won't give up." Miss Helen smiled then, a real warm smile. "That's the right answer. Let me get you the paperwork." Over the next weeks, Jake threw himself into the process. He filled out forms until his hand cramped. Let social workers inspect every corner of his ranch house. Attended classes about trauma and attachment and how to help kids who'd been hurt by life. He cleaned out his spare bedroom, the one full of boxes and old furniture. Painted it a soft blue color. Bought a bed and a dresser from the furniture store in town. Put up shelves for books. He didn't tell Tommy what he was doing yet. Didn't want to make a promise until he knew he could keep it. Tommy noticed something was different, though. Jake seemed distracted sometimes, like his mind was somewhere else. The boy worried that maybe Jake was getting tired of him, that these visits would stop soon like everything else did. One December afternoon, they were walking through downtown, looking at Christmas decorations in the store windows. Snow was falling softly and Tommy caught flakes on his tongue. "Jake," he said quietly. "Yeah, buddy? If you ever want to stop hanging out, it's okay. You can just tell me. You don't have to keep coming if you don't want to." Jake stopped walking. He knelt down right there on the sidewalk so he could look Tommy in the eyes. People walked around them, but Jake didn't care. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. You got that? I know other people have let you down and I'm sorry for that. But I'm not them. When I make a promise, I keep it. But what if you change your mind? I won't. You want to know why? Because these past few months getting to know you, they've been the best part of my days. My ranch feels less empty knowing I'm going to see you on Saturday. You make me want to be better, Tommy. That doesn't just go away. A tear rolled down Tommy's cheek, then another. Jake pulled the boy into a hug, right there in the middle of the sidewalk with snow falling around them. Tommy held on tight like he was afraid to let go. I got something I want to tell you, Jake said when they pulled apart. But I want to do it proper. Can you come sit in the truck for a minute? They climbed into the warm cab of Jake's pickup. Jake turned to face Tommy, his heart pounding. I've been working on something, Jake said, talking to Miss Helen and social workers and filling out a whole mountain of paperwork. And if you want, if it's something you'd be okay with, I'd like you to come live with me, on the ranch. Not just for a visit, but for real. Foster care at first, and then maybe, if things work out, something more permanent. Tommy stared at him like he couldn't process the words. Live with you? Yeah, you'd have your own room. Could help with the horses if you wanted. Go to school in town. It wouldn't be fancy, but it would be home. Your home. You really want me? Jake felt his own eyes getting wet. Yeah, kid. I really want you. Tommy launched himself across the seat, hugging Jake so hard it hurt. He was crying for real now. Big gulping sobs that shook his small body. Jake held him, letting him cry out years of pain and loneliness and fear. Is that a yes? Jake asked with a small laugh. Tommy nodded against his chest, unable to speak. They sat there in that truck for a long time while the snow piled up on the windshield. Two people who'd been lonely finding their way to each other. Sometimes family isn't about blood. Sometimes it's about choosing each other, about showing up even when it's hard, about keeping promises when the world has taught you that promises get broken. For the first time in 3 years, Tommy let himself hope. Really hope? And this time that hope had a solid foundation to stand on. Jake couldn't sleep. For 3 nights straight, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with doubts. What had he been thinking? He was a 52-year-old bachelor who could barely take care of himself some days. His ranch was struggling. His fridge usually contained just beer and leftover takeout. He'd never changed a diaper, helped with homework, or dealt with a kid's nightmare. What if he messed this up? What if he let Tommy down like everyone else had? On the 4th night, Jake got up and walked to the spare bedroom. It looked different now, blue walls instead of dusty white, a real bed with a plaid comforter, a small desk by the window, shelves waiting for books and toys and whatever else a 7-year-old boy might need. Jake sat on the edge of the bed, running his hand over the comforter. This was real. In 2 weeks, Tommy would be sleeping in this bed, eating breakfast at his table, depending on him for everything. Lord, help me not screw this up, he whispered into the darkness. The next morning, Jake drove into town and met with Mrs. Chen, a social worker who'd been assigned to Tommy's case. She was a tiny woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through him. Cold feet? She asked, sipping her coffee across the diner table. Is it that obvious? Mr. Jake, every foster parent gets scared. The ones who don't worry me. But I need to know if you're committed. Tommy has been through enough disruption. I'm committed, Jake said. Scared out of my mind, but committed. Mrs. Chen smiled. Good. Now let's talk about what to expect. Tommy has trauma. He's going to test you, probably within the first week. He'll break rules, push boundaries, maybe even run away. Not because he doesn't want to be with you, but because he needs to know if you'll give up on him. I won't. You say that now. But when he's screaming that he hates you, or when he's destroyed something valuable, or when you haven't slept in days because he has nightmares every night, it gets harder. Jake nodded slowly. I appreciate you being honest. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to prepare you. This boy needs someone who won't quit. If you're that person, you'll change his life. If you're not, it's better to know now. I'm that person, Jake said with more confidence than he felt. The day Tommy moved in was cold and gray. Jake drove to St. Mary's with his stomach in knots. Tommy was waiting on the front steps, his entire life packed into one worn duffel bag. Miss Helen stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Jake helped Tommy load his bag into the truck. It weighed almost nothing, and that broke Jake's heart a little. 7 years of life and everything fit in one small bag. The drive to the ranch was quiet. Tommy stared out the window, his face unreadable. Jake tried to make small talk, but the boy gave mostly one-word answers. The nervousness was rolling off both of them in waves. When they pulled up to the ranch house, Tommy looked around with wide eyes. The house was simple, one story with a wraparound porch. The barn stood behind it, red paint fading. Horses grazed in the distance. Home, Jake said, trying out the word. What do you think? It's big, Tommy said quietly. Want to see your room? Tommy nodded and followed Jake inside. The house smelled like the apple pie Jake's neighbor had brought over that morning. Jake had cleaned everything 3 times, wanting it to be perfect. He led Tommy down the hall and opened the door to the blue room. Tommy stepped inside slowly, like he was afraid it might disappear. He touched the bed, the desk, looked at the empty shelves. This is all mine? He asked. All yours. We can decorate it however you want. Paint it a different color if you don't like blue. Add posters or whatever kids put on walls these days. Tommy set his duffel bag on the bed and unzipped it. He pulled out a framed photo, the only one he owned. It showed a younger Tommy between his mom and dad, all 3 of them laughing. He placed it carefully on the desk. They look like good people, Jake said gently. They were the best, Tommy whispered. Then, so quietly, Jake almost missed it. No one cares about me anymore. The words hit Jake like a punch. He knelt down in front of Tommy, waiting until the boy met his eyes. That's not true. I care about you, Tommy. I care a lot. That's why you're here. People always say they care. Then they change their minds, I know. And I can't change what other people did. But I can show you who I am. And I promise you, kid, I'm not changing my mind. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. I always will care about you. Tommy's eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them back hard. Don't make promises you can't keep. I don't. They stared at each other for a long moment. Jake could see the war in Tommy's eyes, wanting to believe but afraid to. That was okay. Trust took time. Jake had plenty of time. The first few days were careful and polite. Tommy thanked Jake for everything, ate quietly at meals, went to bed when told. It was too perfect, too controlled. Jake knew the real test was coming. It came on day 5. Jake was in the barn fixing a broken stall door when he heard the crash from the house. He ran inside to find Tommy in the kitchen, surrounded by broken plates. The boy's face was red, his hands shaking. I didn't mean to, Tommy said quickly, backing away. I was trying to get a glass and they just fell, and I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. But Jake saw something else in the boy's eyes. A challenge. Waiting for Jake to yell, to tell him he'd made a mistake, to send him back. Jake took a breath, pushing down his own frustration. The plates had belonged to his grandmother, one of the few nice things he owned. But they were just objects. Tommy was more important. It's okay, Jake said calmly. Accidents happen. You hurt? Tommy looked confused. No, but your plates can be replaced. You can't. Come on, let's clean this up together. They swept up the pieces in silence. Jake could feel Tommy watching him, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But Jake just kept cleaning, kept his voice calm, kept his promise. That night, Tommy came to Jake's room around midnight. Jake woke to find the boy standing in his doorway, small and scared in his 2 big pajamas. Bad dream? Jake asked, sitting up. Tommy nodded. Want to talk about it? I dreamed you sent me back. Told Miss Helen you made a mistake. Jake's heart ached. Come here. Tommy walked over slowly. Jake pulled back the covers on the other side of his bed. You can sleep here tonight if you want. No shame in needing company when things get scary. Tommy climbed in, keeping to his side. They lay there in the darkness, the only sound their breathing. Jake, Tommy whispered. Yeah? Do you really want me here? Or are you just being nice? I really want you here. My house was too quiet before. Now it feels like a home. What if I mess up again? Then we'll deal with it. That's what families do. They mess up and figure it out together. We're a family? We're getting there. Families aren't instant, Tommy. They're built piece by piece, day by day. We're building ours. Tommy was quiet for so long Jake thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, very quietly, okay. It was just one word, but it meant everything. It meant Tommy was willing to try, willing to hope, willing to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Jake lay awake long after Tommy's breathing evened out into sleep. The boy took up hardly any space in the big bed, but somehow he made the whole room feel less empty. Jake thought about all the ways this could still go wrong. The challenges ahead, the hard days that were surely coming. But he also thought about Tommy's small smile when he saw his room. The careful way he'd placed his parents' photo on the desk. The trust it took for him to come here tonight. They were both taking a leap of faith. 2 people who'd been alone choosing to build something together. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be broken plates and hard conversations and nights when they both questioned everything, but they'd face it together. And that made all the difference. Outside, the horses moved in the darkness. The ranch settled into its nighttime sounds. And inside, in a small house in the middle of nowhere, a lonely man and a hurting boy began the slow work of becoming a family. The first month was harder than Jake had imagined. Way harder. Tommy tested every boundary Jake set. Bedtime was at 8:30. Tommy stayed up until 10. Keep your room clean. Tommy left clothes everywhere. Be respectful. Tommy slammed doors and muttered under his breath, but the worst part wasn't the disobedience. It was the coldness. Tommy had stopped talking. He'd answer questions with single words, eat his meals in silence, and spend hours alone in his room. The boy who'd started to open up at the orphanage had sealed himself back up tight. Jake tried everything. He asked what was wrong. Tommy said nothing. He suggested activities they used to enjoy. Tommy shrugged. He made Tommy's favorite meals. The boy barely ate. Mrs. Chen warned him this would happen, but knowing it was coming didn't make it easier. One Friday evening, Jake made spaghetti for dinner. He called Tommy 3 times before the boy finally dragged himself to the table. They ate in heavy silence, just the sound of forks scraping plates. How was school? Jake asked, trying again. Fine. Your teacher said you did great on that math test. Okay. Tommy, I'm trying here. Can you meet me halfway? Tommy looked up and Jake saw anger flash in his eyes. Why, so you can feel good about yourself? So you can tell people you saved a poor orphan kid? The word stung. That's not why I'm doing this. Then why are you doing it? Nobody wants a kid like me. You'll figure that out soon enough, and then I'll be back at St. Mary's, so why should I care? Because I'm not giving up on you. Everyone gives up eventually. Tommy pushed his plate away and stood up. Can I be excused? Jake wanted to argue to make the boy understand, but he was tired and frustrated and didn't trust what might come out of his mouth. Yeah, go ahead. Tommy disappeared down the hall. A moment later, Jake heard the bedroom door slam. Jake sat at the table alone looking at the half-eaten spaghetti, wondering if he was failing before he'd even really started. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe he wasn't cut out for this. The weekend brought a new challenge. Jake had to move cattle from the far pasture to the closer grazing area. It was a big job, one that required closing and opening several gates along the way. Want to help? Jake asked Tommy Saturday morning. You can ride in the truck with me. Tommy shrugged, which Jake was learning meant yes without committing to actually caring. They drove out to the far pasture in silence. Jake explained what they were doing, but Tommy stared out the window, seemingly uninterested. Still, when Jake opened gates, Tommy followed instructions about staying in the truck and waiting. They were on the last stretch, cattle moving smoothly toward the closer pasture, when Jake's phone rang. It was his supplier about a feed delivery. Jake took the call, stepping away from the truck to hear better. He was gone maybe 3 minutes. When he came back, Tommy was standing by an open gate. The gate that was supposed to stay closed. The gate that led to the road and the cattle were going through it. Tommy, close that gate. But it was too late. 20 head of cattle were now on the road, spreading out in both directions, and more were following. Jake ran toward them, his heart pounding. A car honked as it swerved around a cow. It took Jake 40 minutes to round up the cattle with help from 2 neighbors who saw what was happening. By the time every animal was accounted for and back in the right pasture, Jake was sweating despite the cold, his shirt torn from pushing through brush. Tommy sat in the truck, his face white as a sheet. Jake walked over, trying to control his breathing and his temper. What happened? I wanted to see if I could pet one, Tommy said quietly. I opened the gate just a little, but then you yelled and I got scared and let go. Jake felt rage bubble up inside him. Those cattle could have been hit by cars. Someone could have gotten hurt. This wasn't a small mistake. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? His voice came out loud and harsh. Those animals could have been killed. Someone could have gotten hurt. What were you thinking? Tommy flinched. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix it. This is a working ranch, Tommy. You can't just do whatever you want. There are rules for a reason. I said I'm sorry. Tommy's voice cracked. I didn't mean to. I mess everything up just like always. That's not... Jake stopped himself, but the damage was done. He'd yelled. He'd lost his temper, just like he'd promised himself he wouldn't. They drove home in awful silence. When they got there, Tommy jumped out and ran to his room. Jake heard the lock click. Jake sat in his truck, his head in his hands. He'd handled that wrong. He knew it immediately. Yes, Tommy had made a mistake, but Jake had responded with anger instead of guidance. He'd done exactly what he shouldn't have done. He thought about his own childhood, about grown-ups who'd yelled at him, made him feel worthless over mistakes. He'd promised himself he'd be different, and he'd failed. After giving them both time to cool down, Jake knocked on Tommy's door. "Go away," came the muffled response. "Tommy, I need to talk to you, please." "I don't want to talk." "I know, but I need to say something." "You don't have to respond. Just listen." Silence. But Tommy didn't tell him to leave again, so Jake took that as permission. "I'm sorry," Jake said through the door. "I shouldn't have yelled at you like that. You made a mistake, yeah, but I handled it wrong. I was scared something bad would happen, and that fear came out as anger. That's not okay. You deserved better from me." More silence. "The thing is," Jake continued, "I'm new at this. I'm going to mess up sometimes. But I want you to know that when I do, I'll own it. I'll apologize. And I'll try to do better. That's all I can promise." Jake waited, but Tommy didn't respond. He went to the living room and tried to do paperwork, but his mind kept wandering. Around dinner time, he made grilled cheese sandwiches and left one outside Tommy's door with a glass of milk. An hour later, the plate was empty. The next morning was Sunday. Jake was up early as always, drinking coffee on the porch and watching the sun rise. He heard the screen door creak and turned to see Tommy still in his pajamas, standing uncertainly. "Morning," Jake said gently. "Morning," Tommy replied. "Want some hot chocolate? I can make some." Tommy nodded and sat in the chair next to Jake. They watched the sky turn from gray to pink to gold, while Jake went inside to heat milk and cocoa. When Jake came back with 2 steaming mugs, Tommy took his with both hands. "I really am sorry about the gate," Tommy said quietly. "I know I messed up. I know you are. And I forgive you. But I need you to understand something. This ranch, it's not just my home. It's my livelihood. I need you to take it seriously when I ask you to do something or not do something. Lives depend on it, animal and human." Tommy nodded, staring into his mug. "Are you going to send me back?" "What? No, why would I do that?" "Because I mess everything up. That's why my other foster families didn't keep me. I broke things or did things wrong." Jake set down his coffee and turned his chair to face Tommy. "Look at me, kid." Tommy looked up with those sad eyes. "Everybody makes mistakes. Me, you, everyone. Yesterday, you made a mistake. But I made one too. I let my fear turn into anger and I hurt you with my words. We both messed up. That's not a reason to quit. That's a reason to talk about it, learn from it, and move forward. But what if I keep messing up? Then we'll keep figuring it out. That's what families do. You think I'm perfect? Last month I left the barn door open and 2 horses got out. The month before that I forgot to pay the electric bill and our power got shut off. I'm not sending you back for being human, Tommy." A single tear rolled down Tommy's cheek. "My other family said they'd never give up too. But they did, I know, and I can't change what they did. All I can do is show you who I am through my actions. I'm asking you to give me that chance. Give us that chance." Tommy was quiet for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Here's what I'm thinking," Jake said. "How about you help me fix that fence in the south pasture today? I'll teach you how to do it right, and we can talk while we work. Sound okay?" "Okay." They spent the afternoon mending fence, Jake showing Tommy how to hammer staples and stretch wire properly. They talked about cattle, about responsibility, about how mistakes were opportunities to learn. Tommy asked questions. Jake answered them honestly. By the end of the day, they were both tired and dirty, but something had shifted. They'd gone through conflict and come out the other side. They'd both messed up and both apologized. They'd kept working at it instead of giving up. That night, as Jake was cleaning up the dinner dishes, Tommy appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Jake? Thanks for not giving up on me." Jake smiled. "Thanks for not giving up on me either, kid. We're learning this together. It wasn't perfect. There would be more rough days ahead. But they'd gotten through their first real crisis. They'd proven to each other that conflict didn't mean the end. And that was something worth building on." Spring arrived like a promise kept. The snow melted, revealing green grass underneath. The trees budded. The whole ranch seemed to wake up from a long sleep. And so did Tommy. It happened slowly, so gradually that Jake almost didn't notice at first. But one morning in late March, Jake realized Tommy was humming while he got ready for school. Just a quiet tune, barely there, but it was sound. Life. Joy creeping back in. Tommy had been with Jake for 4 months now. 4 months of adjustments and arguments and apologies. 4 months of learning each other's rhythms. 4 months of building something that was starting to feel solid. "Jake?" Tommy called from the kitchen. "Can I have 2 eggs today instead of 1? "Sure thing," Jake replied, smiling to himself. The boy was finally eating with appetite instead of just going through the motions. At breakfast, Tommy actually talked about his day ahead, how they were learning about the solar system in science, how his class was reading a book about a kid who lived on a farm, how his teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had asked him to help another student with math. "She thinks I'm good at math," Tommy said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Said I might even be ahead of where I should be." "That's great, buddy. I always knew you were smart." Tommy ducked his head, but Jake caught the small smile. School had been a challenge at first. Tommy was behind in reading and struggled to make friends. He'd sit alone at lunch, anxiety making his stomach hurt. But Mrs. Patterson was patient, and slowly Tommy started catching up. He even had a friend now, a boy named David who also liked drawing. After school that day, Jake took Tommy to the barn. "Remember how I said when you were ready I'd teach you to ride?" Tommy's eyes went wide. "Really? Today?" "Today. Come meet Rosie, she's the gentlest horse I got." Rosie was an old mare, brown with a white star on her forehead. She'd been Jake's first horse, now retired from hard work but still good for easy rides. She stood patiently while Jake showed Tommy how to brush her, how to check her hooves, how to put on her saddle and bridle. "Horses can sense fear," Jake explained, "but they also sense kindness. You treat Rosie with respect, she'll take care of you." Tommy stroked Rosie's neck, his touch gentle. The horse turned her head and nuzzled his shoulder. "She likes you," Jake said. "How can you tell?" "Trust me, if Rosie didn't like you, you'd know. She once bit my ex-wife right on the backside." Tommy giggled. Actually giggled. The sound made Jake's heart feel full. They spent an hour in the round pen, Jake leading Rosie while Tommy learned to sit properly, to hold the reins, to move with the horse instead of against her. Tommy was nervous at first, gripping too tight, but eventually he relaxed. "I'm doing it," he said with wonder. "I'm really riding a horse." "You're a natural," Jake said, and he meant it. Over the next weeks, riding became their evening activity. After dinner, they'd go to the barn. Tommy got more confident, and soon Jake was teaching him to guide Rosie without being led. They'd ride around the pasture, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, as the sun set orange and pink behind the mountains, Tommy said, "I wish my mom and dad could see this. They would have liked it here." It was the first time Tommy had mentioned his parents without looking sad. There was still sadness there, of course. That would probably never completely go away. But there was also something else. "Acceptance, maybe. Peace, tell me about them," Jake said. "What would they have liked best?" Tommy thought about it. Dad would have loved the horses. He always wanted to learn to ride, but never did. And Mom? She would have liked sitting on the porch with coffee, watching the sunrise like you do. They sound like good people. They were. I used to think if I remembered them, it would hurt too much. But Miss Helen said remembering is how we keep people alive in our hearts. Miss Helen's a smart lady. They rode in comfortable silence, the horses' hooves soft on the grass. "Jake, is it okay that I'm starting to feel happy again? Does that mean I'm forgetting them?" Jake stopped his horse and waited for Tommy to do the same. "No, buddy. Being happy doesn't mean you're forgetting. Your parents would want you to be happy. That's what people who love us want for us. They'd be glad you found a place where you can smile again." Tommy nodded, wiping his eyes. "Yeah, they would. School got easier too." Tommy's reading caught up to his grade level. He got invited to David's birthday party, his first party invitation ever. Jake helped him pick out a present and even stayed for a while, awkward among the other parents, but glad to see Tommy playing and laughing with other kids. Mrs. Patterson pulled Jake aside one afternoon. "I wanted you to know Tommy's doing wonderful. Not just academically, but emotionally. When he first came here, he was so closed off. Now he participates, he helps other students, he smiles. Whatever you're doing at home, keep doing it." Jake felt proud hearing that, but also humble. "I'm just trying my best." "Well, your best is pretty good. That boy is thriving." The ranch became Tommy's classroom too. Jake taught him about the land, about the animals, about the work that kept everything running. Tommy learned to collect eggs from the chickens, even though they pecked at him. He learned to feed the cattle, to recognize when one was sick, to mend fences properly this time. On Tommy's 8th birthday in May, Jake threw him a small party. Just David and his family, Mrs. Chen, Miss Helen, and a few neighbors. They ate cake on the porch and Tommy opened presents. New books, art supplies, a cowboy hat just like Jake's. When everyone left and the sun was setting, Tommy and Jake sat on the porch steps the way they used to sit on the orphanage steps all those months ago. Best birthday ever, Tommy said. Yeah? Yeah. I got to spend it with people who actually wanted to be here. That's never happened before. Jake put his arm around Tommy's shoulders. Get used to it, kid. You got a lot more birthdays coming and I plan to be at every single one. Tommy leaned against him. Jake, I think I'm ready. Ready for what? To call you Dad, if that's okay. Jake's throat got tight. He'd been waiting for this, hoping for it, but he'd never wanted to push. It had to come from Tommy in Tommy's time. That's more than okay, Jake managed to say. I'd be honored. Okay, then. Thanks, Dad. For everything. Those words, that one word really changed something. It made official what had been growing between them for months. They weren't just a man and a boy living in the same house anymore. They were father and son, chosen family, forever family. The community that had been skeptical at first came around too. People saw how Jake and Tommy were together, how Tommy had bloomed, how Jake had softened. The old-timers at the feed store started asking about Jake's boy. The ladies at church made sure Tommy got invited to Sunday school activities. The local doctor's wife dropped off cookies just because. It turned out a lot of people had just been waiting to see if Jake was serious. Once they knew he was, they rallied around. Small towns could be hard on outsiders, but they took care of their own. And Tommy was one of their own now. One Saturday, they were working in the garden Jake had started. Tommy wanted to grow tomatoes and pumpkins. Jake had never gardened much, but he figured they could learn together. Dad, Tommy said, patting soil around a seedling. Yeah? I'm glad you came to the orphanage that day. I'm glad you saw me. Jake looked at his son, at this boy who'd been so broken and was now growing strong, and felt overwhelming gratitude. I'm glad too. Tommy, you changed my whole life. You changed mine too. They kept working in the dirt, planting seeds that would grow into something good, just like they were growing into something good. A family. A real family. That night, Jake stood in Tommy's doorway watching the boy sleep. The nightmares had mostly stopped. Tommy slept peacefully now, secure in the knowledge that he was safe, wanted, loved. Jake thought about the lonely man he'd been a year ago, how quiet his house had been, how empty his life had felt. Tommy hadn't just filled that emptiness. He'd brought light, laughter, purpose, and love. Sometimes the best things in life come when you stop looking for them. When you just show up, keep your promises, and let yourself care. Jake had done that, and look what he'd received in return. A son. A reason to be better. A home that finally felt complete. Outside, spring peepers sang their evening songs. Inside, a father watched his son sleep, both of them finally where they belonged. Life had finally found its rhythm. Tommy had been with Jake for 8 months now, and the ranch felt like home. Real home. The kind where you knew which floorboard creaked, where you had your favorite spot on the couch, where you belonged without question. It was a Tuesday morning in June, hot already at 7. Tommy was getting ready for the last week of school before summer break. He was excited about summer, about having 3 whole months to help on the ranch, to ride Rosie every day, to just be a kid without homework and schedules. Jake was in the barn, mucking out stalls. It was heavy work, and he'd been feeling tired lately. More tired than usual. He blamed the heat and the long days. The ranch didn't slow down just because you were getting older. He'd just lifted a heavy wheelbarrow when the pain hit, sharp and crushing like someone was squeezing his chest in a vice. The wheelbarrow fell from his hands. He stumbled, reaching for the stall door, but his legs wouldn't hold him. Jake collapsed onto the barn floor, unable to breathe, unable to call for help. His left arm burned. His vision got fuzzy at the edges. He'd seen enough medical shows to know what was happening. Heart attack. He tried to stay conscious, but the pain was overwhelming. His last thought before darkness took him was of Tommy. Who would take care of Tommy? Inside the house, Tommy was looking for his math folder. He'd looked everywhere and was starting to panic. Then he remembered he'd left it in the barn yesterday when he was helping with chores. He ran outside, calling for Jake. Dad? Did you see my math folder? No answer. That was weird. Jake always answered. Tommy pushed open the barn door. Dad? Then he saw him. Jake lying on the ground, his face gray, not moving. Terror seized Tommy's heart. No, not again. He couldn't lose another parent. He couldn't, but fear had to wait. Tommy ran to Jake's side, his hands shaking. Dad, wake up! Jake's eyes flickered open briefly. Phone, he managed to whisper. Call. His phone. Jake's phone was in his pocket. Tommy pulled it out with trembling hands and dialed 911, the numbers his dad had made him memorize on his first day at the ranch. 911. What's your emergency? My dad, he's on the ground and he won't get up and his face looks wrong. The words tumbled out fast. Tommy was crying but trying to stay calm like Jake had taught him. I think it's his heart. The operator's voice was steady, reassuring. Okay, honey, you're doing great. What's your address? Tommy gave the ranch address, grateful he'd memorized it. How old is your dad? He's 52. Is he breathing? Tommy put his head close to Jake's chest. Yes, but it sounds funny. Like it's hard. That's good. You're being very brave. The ambulance is on its way. I want you to stay on the line with me, okay? Keep talking to your dad. Let him know help is coming. Tommy held the phone between his ear and shoulder while he grabbed Jake's hand. Dad, the ambulance is coming. You're gonna be okay. You have to be okay. Jake squeezed his hand weakly. Those were the longest 12 minutes of Tommy's life. He talked to Jake the whole time, telling him about school, about how the tomatoes were growing, about anything he could think of. Mostly he said, Please don't leave me. Please. When the paramedics arrived, they moved fast. They got Jake on a stretcher, put an oxygen mask on his face, started an IV. Tommy tried to follow them to the ambulance. I need to go with him, Tommy insisted. He's my dad. One paramedic, a kind-looking woman, knelt down. Honey, we can't take you in the ambulance. Is there someone we can call? A family member? Tommy's mind raced. Miss Helen. Mrs. Chen. He gave them Mrs. Chen's number, and someone called while they loaded Jake into the ambulance. He's going to County General, the female paramedic told Tommy. Your social worker is on her way. You did everything right, kiddo. You might have saved his life. Then they were gone, sirens wailing down the long driveway. Tommy stood there alone in front of the barn, Jake's phone still in his hand, feeling like his world was falling apart again. He sank down on the porch steps, the same steps where they'd shared so many conversations, and let himself cry. Mrs. Chen arrived 20 minutes later. She found Tommy still on the steps, his face buried in his knees. Tommy, she said gently, sitting beside him, let's get you to the hospital. Is he going to die? I don't know, honey. But the doctors are going to do everything they can. The hospital was bright and cold and smelled like chemicals. Tommy hated it immediately. They had to wait in a room full of other worried people. Tommy couldn't sit still. He paced, he fidgeted, he watched the door where doctors kept appearing to call names that weren't Jake's. Finally, after what felt like forever, a doctor came out. Family of Jake Rodriguez? Tommy jumped up. That's my dad. Is he okay? The doctor looked at Mrs. Chen, who nodded that it was okay to talk in front of Tommy. Your father had a significant heart attack. We've stabilized him and he's in the cardiac unit. The next 24 hours are critical, but he's a fighter. He kept asking about someone named Tommy. That's me, Tommy said. Can I see him? For a few minutes. But he needs rest. Jake looked small in the hospital bed, tubes and wires everywhere. His face was still pale, but his eyes opened when Tommy came in. Hey, kid, Jake said weakly. You scared me, Tommy said, tears running down his face again. I thought you were gonna die. Takes more than a heart attack to get rid of me. You did good, Tommy. Calling 911, staying calm. I'm proud of you. Don't talk. You need to rest. Need to say something first. Jake's hand found Tommy's. Whatever happens, you're gonna be okay. Mrs. Chen will make sure. Don't talk like that. You're gonna be fine. You have to be fine. I'm gonna try my best. But Tommy, if I'm not, you need to know something. This has been the best 8 months of my life. You gave me a reason to be better. You gave me a family. I love you, son. I love you too, Dad. So you have to get better, okay? You have to. Jake nodded, but his eyes were closing. A nurse came in, gently told Tommy he needed to let Jake rest. The next days were the hardest of Tommy's life. Even harder than when his parents died, because then he'd been too young to fully understand. Now he understood everything. He understood that he might lose the only person who'd truly chosen him. The only person who'd kept every promise. Mrs. Chen tried to make arrangements. Jake had no family, no emergency contacts except her. Tommy couldn't stay at the ranch alone, so she brought him to her house. But Tommy barely slept, barely ate. He just wanted his dad. Social services got involved. There were meetings Tommy wasn't allowed in. He caught phrases through doors. Long-term care. Foster placement. Best interests of the child. They were going to take him away. Even if Jake survived, they thought Jake couldn't take care of him anymore. The heart attack had made them question everything. On the third day, Tommy was allowed to visit again. Jake looked better, more color in his face. But there was worry in his eyes, too. "They want to take me away," Tommy said without preamble. "I heard them talking." Jake's jaw tightened. "I won't let that happen." "How are you going to stop them? You can't even get out of bed." "I'll figure something out. We're family, Tommy. That means something." But Tommy had learned that sometimes love wasn't enough. Sometimes the world had other plans. That evening, Miss Helen showed up at Mrs. Chen's house. She asked to speak with Tommy alone. They sat in the backyard where Mrs. Chen's kids were playing. "I heard what's happening," Miss Helen said, "and I want you to know I'm fighting for you and Jake. I've known that man for 5 years. He's not perfect, but he loves you, and you love him. That matters." "They won't listen," Tommy said bitterly. "Grown-ups never listen to kids. Maybe not. But there's something you can do. There's a hearing in 2 days. A judge is going to decide if you can stay with Jake or if you need a new placement. You can speak at that hearing. Tell the judge how you feel. Will it matter? I don't know. But your voice deserves to be heard." Tommy thought about it. He'd never been brave about speaking up before. He always just accepted whatever adults decided. But Jake had taught him something different. Jake had taught him that fighting for what matters is worth it even when you're scared. "Okay," Tommy said. "I'll do it. I'll tell them." Miss Helen smiled. "Good. Because you and Jake, you're one of the good stories. And good stories deserve happy endings." Tommy hoped she was right, because he couldn't lose his dad, not now. Not when they'd finally found each other. He'd saved Jake's life that day in the barn. Now he had to save their family, and he'd do whatever it took. The courthouse was smaller than Tommy expected. Less scary somehow, though his heart was still pounding as he walked in with Mrs. Chen. Jake was there too, released from the hospital just for this hearing. He looked tired and thin, but he was there. That meant everything. Jake caught Tommy's eye and gave him a small smile. Tommy tried to smile back, but his face felt frozen. The courtroom filled up with people Tommy didn't expect. Miss Helen was there, of course. But so was Mrs. Patterson, his teacher. David's mom. The neighbor who'd helped round up the cattle that day. Dr. Wilson, who'd treated Tommy when he had the flu. People from town, from church, from the feed store. They'd all come to speak for Jake and Tommy. To fight for their family. The judge was a woman with gray hair and glasses. She looked stern but not mean. She shuffled papers and then looked up. "We're here today to determine the best placement for Thomas Rodriguez, currently in foster care with Jake Rodriguez. Due to Mr. Rodriguez's recent medical emergency, the state has concerns about his ability to continue providing adequate care. Let's hear from all parties." The social services attorney went first. She talked about Jake's heart attack, his recovery time, the physical limitations he'd face. She used words like risk factors and child welfare and appropriate placement. She made it sound like keeping Tommy with Jake was dangerous. Tommy felt sick listening to it. They were making Jake sound like he couldn't take care of anyone, when Jake had taken better care of him than anyone ever had. Then it was Mrs. Chen's turn. She stood and spoke clearly. "Your Honor, I've been Tommy's caseworker for 3 years. I've seen him in 4 different placements. None of them worked until Jake. This man took a frightened, withdrawn boy and gave him a home. Real home. Tommy has thrived in the past 8 months. His grades improved. His emotional health improved. He has stability for the first time since his parents died. But can Mr. Rodriguez provide that stability now?" the judge asked. "Given his health condition?" "With support, yes. The community has already rallied. Neighbors have offered to help with ranch work. Tommy himself has learned to be responsible. This isn't just about one man anymore. It's about a whole community that's embraced this family." One by one, people stood to speak. Mrs. Patterson talked about how Tommy had changed from a silent, struggling student to one who participated and helped others. The neighbor talked about seeing them work together on the ranch, about the bond they'd built. Dr. Wilson talked about the medical plan Jake had in place, about how the heart attack was a wake-up call that Jake was taking seriously. Even David stood up, just 8 years old, and said, "Tommy's my best friend. Please don't take him away." Through it all, Jake sat quietly, sometimes wiping his eyes. Tommy held his hand tight. Finally, the judge looked at Tommy. "Young man, would you like to say something?" Tommy's throat went dry. All these people had spoken for them, but now it was his turn. His voice mattered. He stood up, his legs shaking. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge gestured for him to come forward. Tommy walked to the front, very aware of everyone watching him. He looked at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. "I know you probably think I'm just a kid and don't know what's best for me," Tommy started. "Maybe that's true, but I know what it feels like to be wanted and what it feels like to be unwanted. And Jake wants me. He really wants me." Tommy's voice got stronger as he kept talking. "When I was at the orphanage, I felt invisible. Families would come look at us and they'd see right through me. I started to think maybe I was the problem, that there was something wrong with me that made people not want to choose me." He looked at Jake. But then this cowboy showed up. He didn't come looking for a kid. He just came to deliver supplies. But he saw me, really saw me. And he kept coming back. He kept his promises when nobody else ever had. Tommy turned back to the judge. "I know Jake had a heart attack. I was there. I found him. It was the scariest moment of my life because I thought I was going to lose him, like I lost my parents. But you know what? I knew what to do because Jake taught me. He taught me to be brave when things are hard. He taught me to stay calm in emergencies. He taught me that family means not giving up on each other." Tears were running down Tommy's face now, but he didn't stop. "Jake might have a bad heart medically, but he's got the best heart of anyone I know. He chose me when I was unlovable. He was patient when I tested him. He said he'd always care about me, and he kept that promise even when it was hard, even when I made mistakes, even when I pushed him away." Tommy's voice broke a little. "If you take me away from him, you're not protecting me. You're breaking my heart. You're teaching me that love doesn't matter, that families can just be torn apart when things get hard. Is that what you want to teach me?" The courtroom was completely silent. Tommy wiped his eyes and took a deep breath. "Jake saved my life. Not that day in the barn, though I guess I saved his then. He saved my life by showing me that I matter, that I'm worth keeping, that someone can love me even when I'm difficult or scared or broken. Please don't take that away from us. Please let us stay together. We're a family. We chose each other. That should count for something." Tommy's legs felt weak. He sat down quickly, not looking at anyone. Jake reached over and squeezed his shoulder. When Tommy finally looked up, he saw tears on Jake's face too. The judge was quiet for a long moment, writing something. Then she looked up. "I'd like to hear from Mr. Rodriguez." Jake stood slowly, still recovering. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I'm not going to pretend that heart attack didn't scare me. It did. Made me realize I'm not invincible. But it also made me realize what matters most. And what matters most is that boy right there." Jake's voice was rough with emotion. "I was alone for a long time. Thought I was fine with it. Then Tommy came into my life and I realized I'd just been existing, not living. He gave me purpose. He gave me a reason to take better care of myself, to plan for the future, to be better. 8 months ago, I became a foster parent, but somewhere along the way, I became a father, the real kind. The kind who worries when he's late from school. The kind who helps with homework even though math has changed since I was a kid. The kind who would do anything to keep his son safe and happy." Jake looked at Tommy. "When I was lying in that barn, unable to breathe, you know what I thought about? I thought about him. About who would teach him to drive. Who would help him through his first heartbreak. Who would be there for his graduation, his wedding, all the big moments. I couldn't stand the thought of not being there." He turned back to the judge. "I know I'm not perfect. I know my health is a concern, but I've got a plan. I'm eating better, exercising like the doctor said. I've got neighbors lined up to help with heavy ranch work. I'm doing everything right. But more than that, I've got a reason to fight. I've got a son who needs me, and I need him just as much." Jake's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Please don't take him from me. He's my family, my only family. And I'm his. We belong together." The judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. I'm going to take a short recess to review everything I've heard today. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Tommy sat with Jake in the hallway, neither of them talking much. What was there to say? Their future was being decided by a stranger behind a closed door. Miss Helen brought them water. Mrs. Chen sat with them. The neighbors who'd come waited too, a show of support that meant more than words could say. Finally, they were called back in. The judge had her decision written out, but she looked up from the papers to speak directly to them. I've spent 15 years on this bench making difficult decisions about children's welfare. Every case is different, but they all come down to one question. What is in the best interest of the child? Tommy held his breath. I've heard testimony today about Mr. Rodriguez's health concerns. Those are valid and serious. But I've also heard testimony about the remarkable transformation in Tommy over the past 8 months. About a community that has rallied around this family. About a bond between father and son that is clearly genuine and deep. The judge looked at Tommy, then at Jake. Family is not always about biology. Sometimes it's about choice. About commitment. About showing up day after day and doing the hard work of loving someone. From everything I've seen and heard today, that's exactly what you two have built. Tommy felt hope rising in his chest like a balloon. However, the judge continued, and Tommy's hope faltered. I do have concerns. Mr. Rodriguez, you will need to comply with all medical recommendations. You will need to arrange for backup support for times when you cannot handle all the ranch duties. And Mrs. Chen will continue regular home visits to ensure Tommy's needs are being met. I understand, Your Honor, Jake said quickly. Whatever it takes, the judge almost smiled. Then it is my ruling that Tommy will remain in the foster care of Jake Rodriguez, with a plan to move toward adoption proceedings in 6 months, provided all conditions are met satisfactorily. For a moment, Tommy wasn't sure he'd heard right. Then it hit him. They could stay together. Jake wasn't being taken away. He wasn't being taken away, really? Tommy asked, his voice small. Really, the judge said, and this time she did smile. You're going home. The courtroom erupted in applause and cheers. Tommy turned and threw his arms around Jake, who held him tight despite his soreness.